let's.
Okay.
Right, okay, let's go. So, hi and welcome to Stop Sweeping It Under the Carpet. My name is Jacqueline Francis, and I'm so delighted to have Cllr Maureen Worby on the interview with me, and Dave Sleet. Have I pronounced it correctly?
Yeah, that's the one.
Great, great. Okay, so let's just give this some context. So I've spoken, I read the report. I spoke first and foremost to the former councillor, Peter Chad, about the report.
Yeah, he's still a councillor, former mayor.
Mayor, beg your pardon, mayor, yes. And then I interviewed some of the ladies that were involved in the report as well. And
yep.
So now I wanted just to take it to the next level and interview yourself, and also to invite Dave on to give it, so it can be from a different perspective, rather than what we're always talking about. So if I can first and foremost start with you, Maureen, and tell us a little bit about the report and why it started.
I mean, the context in which we commissioned this piece of work was, as a borough, we've had for a very long time high levels of domestic abuse, highest in London, something we're not proud of, but something we've tried to address for a number of years, and we just didn't seem to be able to get to the bottom of it. Two incidences for me that sparked the need to do something, and I'll just touch on them briefly. We did some structured surveys with our year 10 and 12 pupils within our secondary schools.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, 26% of the respondents, both girls and boys, said it was all right to slap your partner.
Right.
That's a quarter of our children think it's okay in a relationship,
right,
to be abused.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, at around the same time, unfortunately, we had a domestic abuse homicide. That's not rare. Unfortunately, that's not rare. But in this instance, on the morning that Karen was murdered by her husband, a Facebook entry appeared on a community page that said, police in, and they named a street. And that's all.
Mm.
Within 5 minutes, people were posting on that site, oh my God, I hope that's not Karen.
Okay.
Now, the community knew the risks that woman was at.
Yeah.
We didn't know as a council, and the police didn't know.
Mm.
So for me, those two things coming together, if you like, were the straw that broke the camel's back. And I want to get to the bottom of why is domestic abuse so normalised within communities. We break through. And that's why we decided to commission this report.
Right.
So we brought together a number of national experts from a whole range of experiences to, if you like, look at us and what we were doing as a council, talk to our survivors, and that's what we call them here. We don't call them victims of domestic abuse. They're survivors because they have all survived. And we wanted them to come up with what could we do, but also a blueprint of what could be applied as a checklist elsewhere.
Yeah.
This isn't a unique experience to us. But if we had the high level of incidences we had, you know, my belief was if anybody else wants to use this, please do. That's very long, I know, but brief explanation how we started this project.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, Dave, you've heard what Councillor Maureen has just said. What is your take on it? Because if I can just go back to, in the report, it goes back to Jo Richardson back in 1986, where, you know, she talks about the same thing at the high level of domestic abuse in Barking and Dagenham. But I mean, that was back in 86, and here we are having the same conversation. So Dave, what do you think that could be done differently?
Okay. Well, first off, on behalf of APA, I'd like to congratulate the council for taking this on. I wouldn't be so disheartened that you got high numbers. I'd actually see that as there is an environment where people are happier to come forward. And that's why you get high numbers, because you've got that information being made available. Because where you have low numbers, invariably, no one's asking the question. And that gives a really false economy as to what's happening in the real world. So congratulations to the council and to the team involved in actually bracing this. Psychologically, why has this become normalized? And I would say part of that is because we use the phrase domestic violence. In itself, this is an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term that shields the rest of the world from the reality of what goes on under the umbrella. So we've normalized it, we've desensitized ourselves to the habitual rape, to the torture, to the very essence of what the initial law that outlawed abuse in the home was set out to do. And because we've done that, that becomes the seed of the poisonous tree. We've got to go back to why this law was formed and what it was originally designed to do in 1976. Because the focus at that point was not on gender-orientated violence. It was about abuse in the home. And when we get back to, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about abuse in the safest place that most of us should have. That rocks people's thought processes. Because it comes out from that umbrella term.
So, Councillor Maureen, can I just ask, so we're talking about, or you mentioned how they, young people thought it was normal behaviour. So with regards to the outcomes, one of them does suggest educating young people. How do you intend going about that?
So we've set up a whole series of approaches to how we address it with young people, principally by using peer groups within the young people. So we work with the youth zone, we work with here what's called the BAD Forum, which is our Barking Dagenham Youth Forum. We work with the young mayor, who has, and for 2 years running, the young mayors have selected domestic abuse and violence against women and girls to be their areas that they want to highlight. We've also introduced a programme within each of our secondary schools to I mean, if you look, I mean, and I'd recommend the report to anybody, but it comes up with a whole series of recommendations for us to implement. And what I didn't want was, 1, to do a knee-jerk reaction, 2, to promise things that I couldn't sustain. So the report is written, if you've seen it, and the recommendations in almost like a 5-step process in each area. And we will take it step by step, because I want to make sure that we actually deliver it and we continue to deliver it. Can't make promises all in one go.
Yeah.
So, but the education through schools, setting up the forums where young people can talk about this, one of the first steps that doesn't cost us any money. We've been able to do that straight away.
So Dave, do you think that would be the right approach, to set up forums for young people to talk about these issues?
I think it's one of the avenues that has to be put in play. I think, APA has developed a 3-prong approach, and it starts with primary schools, and with our storytelling workshop we use for introducing the concept of coercive environments. Because if you can help an 8, 9 and 10-year-old understand coercive environment, then you give them the key indicators that we know lead to that abusive environment in the home.
Sorry, can I just stop you there? So Maureen, can I just ask you to jump in? So when you say that you're creating these forums in school, are you starting from the primary age?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, because of the, I mean, I hate to say because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because of the pandemic, we've had to. Children were locked. When we talk about lockdown, we're talking about children being locked in their homes.
Yeah.
24 hours a day, from children from 5 years upwards who have unfortunately witnessed domestic abuse, behaviours in all sorts. And that's now beginning to come out across the spectrum. You know, young people are talking to teachers about what they've seen. And yes, we're having to address it. I mean, obviously our primary route for addressing it is in secondary, but it doesn't mean that, you know, we've not been working with particularly the teachers in how to respond in that younger age group. For them, for some of those young people, it is really traumatic what they've witnessed. They wouldn't have been aware of it.
Yeah, and it's also that normalization, because they've had no other avenue to explore it or to challenge it or to even understand that what they're experiencing is not what everyone else is experiencing. That's the beauty of having the storytelling workshops, and we're the only organisation that provide that to that audience. And the beauty of those that approach is that the stories are designed for the younger pupils. They're not designed for the 8, 9, 10-year-old. So we're using the psychology of an 8, 9, 10-year-old in order to support a 5, 6, 7-year-old understand coercive environments. And by having that awareness at that level, by the time they get to high school, they've already got those identifiers. They're carrying that flag of going, actually, no, that's not the way that's supposed to be.
And it's a real indictment of our community at the moment that we're having to talk about that age group.
Yeah.
You know, they should be protected. Shouldn't be exposed to this. But unfortunately, you know, it is a reality for not every home, but it's too much of a reality at the moment. And I remember when we launched the idea of the commission, we had a young man speaking at that conference. He was running one of our projects to protect young people from gangs. He talked quite emotively about he had lived in an environment the whole of his living memory where his mother had been abused. And he grew up thinking that was normal. And he grew up thinking that all of his friends were experiencing the same. And that's, you know, it's creating, whether it's through storytelling or through the work we've been having to do, obviously, in all of our schools since lockdown ended, that children are being given that space to raise those issues about it.
And it's that perception, isn't it? If you think what you're experiencing is what everyone else is experiencing, but they're not talking about it, then you won't talk about it.
No, that's it.
Exactly.
That's why that normalization has to be challenged as early in that learning process.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think,
what do you say to okay, we all live in boroughs that are diverse, you know, the UK is a diverse place to live in. So what about, you know, those in arranged marriage and forced marriages who have their cultural, you know, to deal with? Have you get them, you know?
Well, for me, what's been really important in this journey is that I have from day one involved our faith forum and our faith leaders, because it's an important part of the culture for our BAME communities, be them Muslim communities, our Black African communities. Their faith it's far more, I mean, and I don't mean this probably how it's going to come out, but it's far more important than it is to the traditional white community, working class community here in Barking and Dagenham. And that's, you know, so I had sitting on my expert panel that worked alongside the commission, lead members from our faith communities. And my challenge to them has been to take this and the findings and just start that conversation. Because in many of those faiths, domestic abuse is a taboo subject. I've been saying you don't talk to children about it. You don't talk in church about it. You don't acknowledge, you know, the lady that's sitting there with sunglasses on. You don't acknowledge or think about why that's happening. Because it's just not so. And I'm really proud to say that both in the Gurdwara, in the mosque, and through our community of pastors, this is now being talked about. Okay. And it's the work I've been doing. I've been asked to go and speak to groups in all three of those lead, or you know, the lead members here. And it's just having it on the agenda about it will break down some of those barriers. If I've got the pastor standing next to me when I'm talking about the work of the commission, it says far more than my report can say.
So Dave, what's your spin on that then? What do you think?
I think psychologically, we have to understand that the cultural diversity has grown with that avenue of control within it as part of its own makeup. We're asking an entire cultural system to realign itself to something that it has never, ever had to question within itself at a time when the whole community is having to challenge itself. I think it's crucial to reflect on the fact that we are going through grief. As a species, we are grieving for what we had in place culturally, systemically, and individually before COVID took hold. Everything that we knew, everything that we planned, everything that our way of doing things died in March 2020. And we are grieving, and we've got to give people the chance to grieve. And part of what happens during grief is anger. And anger comes out, and when people aren't empowered to manage that, and that's survivors, as Maureen calls them, we call them 1976ers. Because 1976 was when abuse in the home was made illegal. That's how young this piece of legislation is. But everyone's gone past 1976. No one is anchored to 1976. And anyone who's been through that experience, when they are brought to that conversation, they are anchored to their experience. Psychologically, we're not letting anybody get past domestic violence. We've got to give people avenues out. We've got to give people that empowerment to say, whatever culture their experience is, whatever their upbringing is, there are avenues out from what you were not comfortable about before.
And I mean, and you know, sorry, Jackie, but building on that, one of the strengths, I think, of what we're trying to do, and one of the things that some people find very challenging, is working with perpetrators. Because if you do not address the perpetrators and what gets them to that point, they're just going to move on to another.
I know that during my interviews with women, I always get quite frustrated, and I try to contain myself because the onus always seems to be on the women. what are the repercussions to the
Well, it's not just repercussions. I mean, one of the pilots, one of the things we're running, and it is a pilot scheme as a result of this, and we've managed to get some funding from the Home Office to do it.
Okay.
And that's about arranging housing for perpetrators, because 9 times out of 10, it's the woman and her children that have to move, that have to flee, that have to give up their schools, their support system, their community. That shouldn't be the case. Now, we're as I say, we're piloting this approach, and it only works, one, where the survivor is willing to try it, and 2, where the perpetrator is willing to engage with us and go on awareness training and what have you. But what we're able to do with this pilot is to offer the perpetrator accommodation, so that the mum, normally it's the mum and the children, can stay in their home.
Yeah.
That's a psychological kind of solution, as you say, when the perpetrator of either gender is prepared to engage.
Yeah.
But invariably, that intervention happens at a point where the emotions are so raw, the anger is so high, that is going to be the complete opposite of where that individual is at that time. And it almost needs to be a case of contain the crisis and work out the action plan, and then allow that switch to take place as quickly as possible with everybody there. But that needs the biggest shift in multi-agency approach this country will have seen since 1941.
Okay, right, wow.
You know,
but how are perpetrators, do they acknowledge, do most of them acknowledge that they're doing something wrong? Because some won't, they won't think it's...
No, some won't. And I mean, all I can say from our experience so far, that, you know, we have a limited number of places on this pilot. Eventually, we hope to be able to support 60 families this way, but initially it's 10. And we haven't had a problem in finding people that want to go down this avenue. I mean, you know, Dave's right. I mean, you know, the anger of that initial is normally because the perpetrator also thinks, why should I give up my home?
Yeah.
So if we can go in and with the police at that early stage and say, well, you might have to give up this home, but we will actually make sure you've got somewhere to live. Then a lot of times that's the timing is right. Then it's having that offer, because that's the basics that everybody wants is food and shelter. And if we're saying if you're a perpetrator, that actually we're just going to deprive you of that shelter and you've got no alternative, that's when, if you like, they dig their heels in. And
this also comes down to what's the legal consequences long term. If that perpetrator is then charged and goes to court and it's seen as he was already moved out of the home, that's already a guilty verdict right there. Yeah. And that presentation has to be so carefully managed within the legal frameworks.
Oh no, I agree, but I think if you, I don't know if you've had a chance to read this, but the key message that came through the commission and the report really, really strongly is, you know, and this is for all parties in the process, is actually believe the survivor, initially believe the survivor, and don't make them keep reliving the trauma. Having to tell God knows how many agents what they've been through. And that
single point of contact, isn't it, Maureen, that makes it so much simpler that the agencies have a single point of contact The family has that same single point of contact, and they are the conduit for everything that the system needs to give to the family and everything the family needs to give into the system, rather than that 17,000 different people that have to be spoken to over a year period.
Yeah, absolutely,
And I mean, we've got sign up from my local health colleagues and from the police to adopt the principles in this report. So, you know, I mean, I can only wait and see with our survivors group whether this actually happens. You know, we've challenged, we've asked Sophie Linden in the Mayor's office, who's been really supportive of what we've been doing, to use the report to look at the training that the Met Police have around, and it's just about that initial "we believe you," actually just drumming that in as the first principle for anybody who's dealing with domestic abuse or violence against women and girls.
Would that mean that the police would have to have more training as well?
I think it's about adapt. Now, do you know what I mean? To be fair, the level of training in the Met Police around domestic abuse now is quite high, because you know, we have to remember it's one of the most frequent calls on their time. I think what we're asking is just to look at the content of that. You know, we still hear from survivors, it's that first contact where, you know, they don't want to feel as if they're having to justify. You know, so it's that we, you know, and we believe you.
First contact sows the seed for the rest of the relationship moving forward. And anyone who has experienced trauma will say exactly the same, whatever that trauma is. It's the systemic first contact that tells you how this relationship is going to go.
So if we all start saying that mantra, "we believe you," if that's in the mind of any first responder in that scenario, things may play out differently. I'm not saying that every reported case, 99% of them are, but, you know, but if everybody that approaches that case approaches it with the tenet of "we believe you," we will break down so many of the barriers as to why people don't come forward.
Can I just ask, did you set up the report? I mean, I know why you set up the report, but is there any government, I mean, it's from the local authorities, any support from the local, from the government? I mean, how's it being funded?
We have to fund it all. I mean, and that's why you get a variety of responses from different local authorities. It's not specifically funded anywhere. So the council, you have to make your own decision how you're going to address it, the level of funding you're going to put into it, how you support your staff. I mean, you know, we're quite proud of the stance we take as a local authority. We give any member of our staff 10 days paid leave if they're dealing with domestic abuse.
Okay. Because
we know, you know, if you've got to sort out, you know, a new home, solicitor, well, all sorts of things. And just the pure pressure of dealing with it. So, you know, but that's a huge commitment. Now, looking at the services and the support services that I put in overall, and again, I could spend 5 times what we've got of all of the pressures on the budget. And that's why I was saying at the beginning that we asked the Commission to give us a phased approach to improve services, because I knew I couldn't do it all immediately.
One of the things that Apras has produced and is working to kind of raise the awareness around is actually in the employment arena.
I was just about to say that.
Because when people experience domestic abuse in the, I can't do domestic violence, right? There is nothing domestic about violence in the home.
No.
It chokes me to even think that that's where we've got to.
Mm.
But more people experience that abuse when they're in work than ever do when they're out of work. But work becomes their safe haven.
Mm. Yeah.
And employers lose billions of pounds in this country year on year as a result of having to retrain staff that they've lost because of this. That's staff that the issues have been brought into the workplace, productivity's been impacted.
Yeah.
We've got to support businesses to be able to keep staff safe when they are experiencing this. Because that's going to help businesses save money.
Absolutely.
And this
So
is
again, we what we're trying to do as part of our chat, and Dave's right, you know, so we've produced a you know, alongside our colleagues in the trade unions, and you would expect me to say that, but we've produced a charter for employers to think about. And it doesn't have to go as far as we do in terms of giving 10 days paid leave, but it is about having somebody, a named person in the organisation that's been fully trained, that can actually pass people on to the right organisations. And we've produced a very simple charter that we're hoping our Chamber of Commerce will pass around our employers forum, just to think about how they can be supportive and not always at great cost.
Yeah.
Having someone who knows where to signpost can be the most critical thing when that woman or man, because men are victims as well, are survivors, but when they come and talk at the workplace, having someone who knows where to send them. And you're right, if you do that on day one, you don't lose that member of staff.
Absolutely. I mean, we haven't got much time left. I think we've got about 5 minutes left on this. So we can talk about, well, I can talk about this all evening, but quickly, can I just mention the outcomes, the 7 outcomes, professional services, and how far, if I remember correctly, it's for 5 years, this report is being commissioned for, is that right?
What they've given me is a 5-year approach to tackling it.
Yeah, and how's it going so far? I know it's early days. How's it going so far?
Yeah, no. Well, I think I can actually tick half of year 1 off already. Okay. But we will accelerate it as quickly as we can do it. As I say, again, one of the key things we've done is the survivors group that was set up to support the commission, advise the commission. They have stayed together. I found them somewhere where they can meet safely and anonymously. Okay. Not everybody wants to identify themselves. Some are willing to do so, but we run past them every piece of policy, every step that I want to take to say, actually, does this feel right? Because I luckily have never been abused. And I say that because it is luck. I am lucky. So I'm not the one necessarily, I feel passionate about it, but I'm not the one that's always going to know whether what is being proposed is right. I will keep that group going for as long as I can. We will always refer people onto them as well, so that I've got a reference point to go back. And one of the key principles of the commission was, I have to be able to say to myself as the lead member for the council, we are led by survivors. If I haven't got them there to act as my reference group, I won't be led by them. So, yeah.
Right. Dave?
I think that the steps that are already being taken are phenomenal. I think it's very brave to kind of step up and say, look, we've discovered we've got high numbers here, let's do something about it. I do want to mention males that this, and as one, I am, you know, within our organisation, I am a 1976er. I make no secret about it. I went through a tough experience when I was younger. So this is not something that is gender specific. It is not something that is socio-economic specific. It is not something that is culturally specific. This is something that is human. And it's when humans are not able to cope with the experiences that are being thrown at them, that these things pile out. And we've got to empower both those that experience this and those that are dishing this out to move forward. Because, as Maureen rightly said, if we do not do the empowerment, we just have the revolving door. And that revolving door has shaped the response for decades. Because we know, on average, there is up to, and past in some cases, 37 attempts to get away from that situation. And when the system of support says, well, there's 37 attempts, so, you know, we'll wait for the 36 before we get serious. You've got to break that mindset.
Absolutely.
Give people at first contact, here's your escape routes. You decide which one's going to work for you when it's right for you, and the system has to be responsive to that pathway that's chosen at that given moment in time.
I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned men. I mean, during the time I've been doing Stop Sweeping Under the Carpet for about 3 years now, and I've only ever had one male person, you know, come on and share their story with me. And even when I talk to men, some men are surprised that men are abused. They can't see that women can be perfect.
There are there's a high percentage of men, higher than we probably even acknowledge, because there's
also the perception of what that abuse is. Men will see abuse, or the umbrella term, as that's covering physical abuse.
Okay, I'll stop it there now, because I'm aware that it's going to cut off as soon as possible. And I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a very interesting conversation. I'm sure we'll be having this conversation in days and months to come and years to come. And hopefully things would have improved. But thank you, Cllr Maureen. Thank you, Dave Sleet, for joining me.
Thank you.
Stop Sweeping Under the Carpet. Until next time, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Stay safe.